Welcome to the Banking with Life podcast. I'm your host, James Neathery. I'm really excited today because we're celebrating our 300th episode. And so, it's coming up and you think, wow, we could have fun with this. So that's the goal. We're going to have fun with it today if we can. I'm not trying to make a historical presentation, but I am going to reference history and the idea of the remnant of 300, right? And connect it, if I can, with the infinite banking concept. Maybe point out some analogies. It's very interesting to me, and I hope you have fun. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Banking with Life podcast. I'm your host, James Neathery, and I'm really excited today because this is our 300th episode. And, the 300, I think, is significant in history. So we're going to kind of talk about that, maybe relate it, if I can, to the infinite banking concept and have fun doing it. Okay. So thanks for listening. This idea of the remnant is historical, right? It goes back many centuries. And just the idea of 300, when I say 300, if you have a student of history whatsoever, you think of, Sparta and Thermopylae, and had the opportunity to go to Athens a couple of years ago, and it was really great, and I would encourage everyone to go if they can, but we went to Thermopylae, right? And it's really interesting to me. And so I kind of want to talk about that, the idea of a remnant, a chosen few, a very few, David's mighty men, Gideon and his 300 men, and here in this case, King Leonidas, the old guy at 60, going to make a stand so his civilization, his people don't get destroyed. Yeah, the idea that 60 is too old to practice the infinite banking concept, and that's up around my age, so it makes a difference to me. It's interesting. No, you're not too old. Principles are principles. The truth is the truth. And if you don't stand up for them, who is? Right? So if these 300, in this case, at Thermopylae, trying to defeat this Persian army for the second generation that's trying to come and wipe them out, who will? If you don't stand up, who will? Okay, I don't want to get chasing too many rabbits, and I do have some notes to keep me online, although this is not a history lesson at all, and I hope I can even pronounce all the names, right? But at the sake of trying to appear like I'm being too philosophical, I'm so not. I just want to draw some obvious connections and maybe make some analogies. I get shade thrown at me all the time for, philosophy. You're big on philosophy. You betcha. Philosophy matters in everything you do. Okay. But we're talking about the infinite banking concept. And I just want to go back. The idea of the 300, the remnant, all right? In this case, Thermopylae, King Leonidas, they, and the numbers are the numbers, they're real numbers, current numbers. And, I want to talk about that for a minute, but the 300 making their last stand at Thermopylae, right? And I think the invading force was, they say, between 100 and 300,000. Well, Herodotus, right, 4th century historian, says the number was upwards of 1 million in totality. They didn't all come down the land line, to go sack Athens. There were some on the sea as well. But whatever the numbers were, they were greatly outnumbered. Right. And they're taking a stand. Everybody's doing something different. They don't want to show up and commit and probably don't have the discipline to. Why do you talk about that, James? Because the infinite banking concept requires discipline, right? It requires discipline. Nobody's going to come save you financially, right? And the odds are against you and your family as they stand. And so if you don't do something, who will? All right. Couple of points, right? And so that's really kind of my mindset. And I'm just going down this idea that, here's this big invading army coming down to sack Athens. They squeeze them up strategically. And I know that I'm going to talk about strategy, collaboration, and campaigns, which I really don't like using those terms within the infinite banking footprint at all, because they all have a militaristic basis. And, I'm not, I am. I'll just leave that alone. Right. So I don't really like those words, but here, this is a legitimate battle. It's not like there's a marketing campaign with a strategy to collaborate with, somebody to get you, the individual, the listener, to be manipulated into something that, you might not otherwise do. I'm not talking about that at all. Okay. But I do want to point out that, here's this great big army, you're outnumbered. And at the time, all of those Greek city-states, most of the time, or half the time, a lot of the time, they fought each other. They would only come together for survival, right? On purpose, with intent. And so nobody likes it when you're not going along the way they are. Anyway, a lot of them got to go home. The ones that could go home were because they didn't have a father or son, somebody to carry on their family name. But don't you know, there's somebody there that tried to sabotage the whole deal and actually did. I forget the guy's name. He's not portrayed properly in the movies. I think his name was Ephialtes. He goes to the Persians and says, hey, I'll give you a shortcut how you can flank, the Athenians and Leonidas and his army. And sure enough, he was going to get some gold from, somebody selling you out, somebody going for the gold. Everybody's always trying to get paid, right? And they're not all on your side, right? Well, what's new in the big wide world? Not much, all right? But the point is, King Leonidas, the old gentleman, he fought and died, and his 300 died. I think there was 6,000 or 7,000 of them total, but they're still facing a massive army of 150 or 200,000. So, they lost that battle, but because they stood up, they won the war. And not only them, right? I mean, they weren't the only ones. There was an Athenian politician or Spartan politician that was on the sea. And that very same day, he attacked the Persian army, greatly outnumbered, but decimated them, not completely, but enough. So here, King Leonidas slowed him down, and the other politician, I forget his name. Anyway, he slows him down, the Persians, but he won that little battle, the captain, and he was able to sail around and evacuate Athens, right? So here, Xerxes, they won that Battle of Thermopylae. They went and they sacked Athens, but it was an empty city, right? They all got carted off to Salome by that Athenian politician that was a captain of the seas. Anyway, it's a very good story. I think I happen to like history, but I think all of that is very interesting, and it is very relatable to the you and me level when it comes to the infinite banking concept. And if I back up, Moulin L'Abbe, come and take it. That's the origin of that. Anyway, it's a very good story. The outcome is the Athenians won, and it ended that was the last of the Persian invasions. And so they won. But just think about the discipline that it took to be able to stand there, and you're likely not going to win, and you're going against the grain, but you ultimately win. You or your people ultimately win. In this case, the people ultimately won, right? Because of the actions of a few, the remnant. And so I think that's very important. If we talk about David's mighty men of valor, I think there's only 30 to 37 of them. And that's what came to my mind in preparation to talk about this 300th episode. But I kind of conflated in my mind the David's mighty men and the Gideon's 300 men. That's a beautiful story in Judges. There were 32,000 of them. They were going to go fight the Midianites, and greatly outnumbered, 130 to 150,000 Midianites. And here you got 32,000 Israelis and from all the 12 tribes. And and God said, no, you've got too many men there, Gideon. You're liable to go out and win and then take all the glory and all the credit. And so he said, you have too many men. So Gideon said, hey, speaking to the whole 32,000, says, look, if you're afraid, if you don't want to, if you're trembling, whatever the verbiage was, you can go home without penalty, without repercussion, and still maintain your honor. Well, about 22,000 of them left, leaving 10,000 to face 150, 135, 150,000 Midianites. And then God tells Gideon, he's like, well, you still have too many, right? Because, if you win, then you're going to take all the glory. Oh, look what I've done. So he had Gideon take them down, all these 10,000 men down to the well, the pool, to refresh themselves, drink some water. And he said, have them drink. And so they all drank. And then God said, well, see the 300, they cupped the water and brought it to their mouth. The other 9,700 put their face in the water and drank. He said, yeah, those 300, take them. So that's where, 300 comes to my mind. And I think all of that was along about the 12th century. I think the Battle of Thermopylae was in about 480 BC. All of these enduring principles live today. And not only the infinite banking, your financial world, they live today in our lives. And I think it's very important. And I just want to draw out. So there's kind of the background, historical, loose as it is, the background, and then talk kind of about the infinite banking concept and controlling the banking function at the you and me level, right? The system, the banking system is what it is today. You can call it good, bad, or indifferent, but it is not really built for you to profit. It is built for you to go borrow money and spend money as a consumer in the economy. There's no question, in banking, no question. It's the oldest and most profitable business in the world. And if you abdicate your responsibility to control the banking function, somebody's going to perform the banking function and they're going to profit from that. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to remain that way forever, right? You can do something about it. You can join the Remnant. I don't know how many people practice the infinite banking concept around the country, but I would say several, many, 10,000, 20,000. I have no idea. But there's not that many compared to the 330 million in a population, right? So you might need to think, it might be okay with thinking differently, making a decision, taking a stand. And it's like the purposeful idea of capital formation, right? On purpose, with intent. I am going to accumulate a pile of capital and I'm going to control it. And then, and only then, can you perform and control the banking function. You must have access to capital, right? And here you are. If you even entertain this idea very long, you'll be part of the Remnant, right? You're going to get slaughtered. They're going to chew you up and spit you out. Who? The big bad life insurance companies, or whoever the great they are. It's like, you're not going to win. You're going to lose. Well, you may win a lot of battles or you may lose a lot of battles, but ultimately, if you practice this concept, I believe somebody can win financially and even generationally, right? So it is possible to win on a long-term basis, right? The idea of capital formation, capital control, and then performing the banking function. And everything that you do in life is associated with banking. Banking is nothing but the movement of money. You go outside, make an investment, make an opportunity, save capital for future consumption. That's banking. All of that is a movement of money. All right. So the idea that you're not going to, maybe you don't have the idea or the need, you think you don't have the need for banking, and maybe you're not going to go finance something. Maybe you're not. But maybe you are, maybe your children are, maybe your grandchildren are, maybe you're going to take passive income from some of your financial assets. And I'm just saying, hey, there might be a place for dividend paying whole life insurance. Why would we even consider that? Right? Because before you can control the banking function, you have to have access to capital, preferably by ownership, at least by control. Right? And if you consider the works of Nelson Nash, becoming your own banker, building your warehouse of wealth. I know there's a plethora of books out there and naysayers, and God bless them, right? I'm talking about you, your money, your capital, your family. Well, now it maybe matters more, right? The truth, what's actually available that you can do. What is actually reasonable that you can create and control. And when you consider Nelson's work in becoming your own banker and you apply that work There's just no doubt in my mind that one could control the banking function to the extent that they wish to, right? And you can benefit from that. And your people can benefit from that. And future generations can benefit from that. If I go back to this Xerxes and trying to annihilate the Athenian people and the city-states, they'd all be one big homogeny now. They wouldn't even exist, right? So maybe what you do does matter. Maybe. And maybe you'll, lose some along the way, but you'll win some along the way, and you'll ultimately win, and your people will ultimately win. That's my encouragement. I love history, so this is very interesting to me. It may or may not be interesting to you, but there's a lot of lessons in there that can be directly related to this idea of being independent. Yep, even though I'm part of a small group, not always working together, but when it means something and it makes a difference, then it's working together for our own personal benefit, right? Not harming anyone, not taking anything away from anyone, but benefiting for you and your family for more than one generation. It's pretty powerful, and I just encourage you to consider the idea of banking and controlling the banking function at the you and me level. So consider the idea that you could become your own banker. And if you do, Becoming Your Own Banker, the book by R. Nelson Nash is the place to go. Not a fancy video. I mean, there's some good videos out there. There's no question. That's the bedrock. That's the first work, right? That's where you go. Test it out. See if it makes sense to you. If it does, great. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But if it does, and it could, I would encourage you to work with somebody competent that has your best interest in mind to put that in place for you and your family. Okay, I had fun. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us on the Banking with Life podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and click on that little notification bell. Otherwise, join us on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher for weekly content.